charming Hilltop Cottage retreat, confronting the terrifying river wives, only to discover my wife turned one of them. The Hilltop Cottage was even smaller in person than it appeared online, which only added to its charm. Sunlight streamed through the mismatched windows, reflecting off the aged brass fixtures and the worn yet beautiful woodwork framing the doors. Outside, the garden was wild and untamed in the best way, full of pollinator-friendly flowers for bees, tangled roses, and time creeping through cracks in the old stone pathway. Despite its imperfections, the price had been remarkably low, and Mara was thrilled. "I love it," she said with a broad smile, arms wide as if already embracing the place. "And look at that view. It's like a painting. So many beautiful spots. For photos for my shop." She was right. The view was breathtaking. Fields rolling gently in soft green waves, a slender river shimmering with silver streaks. The town lay low in the valley, a cluster of rooftops surrounded by sleepy trees. I told Mara this was a romantic, fresh start. I used phrases like digital detox and back to basics, which she eagerly accepted. What she didn't know was how deeply buried I was in debt. Credit cards, loans, predatory lenders who kept offering more despite my inability to repay. I had gambled our house as a last hope to recover and lost. This cottage was a cheap fallback. I just wasn't sure how long we could maintain the facade. The general store was squat and low, seeming almost grown out of the ground itself. Inside, the air smelled of old wood mixed with a sharp tang. Vinegar or pickled onions, perhaps. Mara was halfway down a narrow aisle, already chatting about local trails, the kind of easy conversation she excelled at. The man she spoke to was likely in his late 50s, maybe older, with a weathered face and large hands that seemed almost too big for the delicate register he tapped with a knuckle. When he finally looked up, it was slow and gruff, as if that was just his manner with age. His gaze passed from Mara to me, then settled on our new home. "The river wives don't like being seen," he said quietly, his tone calm but rehearsed. "Especially not by young women." Mara paused, flipping a trail map over. "The what?" "The ones by the water," he answered quickly. "You'll recognize them if you see them. Don't let it get that far, and if you have to walk past the river, wear something that doesn't invite trouble. Cover up." Before we could ask for clarification, another voice, likely a customer, spoke from elsewhere in the store. "He's right. Don't greet them. Best to ignore them." Mara turned, frowning as if weighing whether this was a joke or some local superstition. I watched her fold the trail map carefully, her expression unreadable but tense. She said nothing, but the silence felt heavy. She nodded curtly and stepped away, still holding the map. At the far end of the counter, an older woman looked up from behind a battered produce scale. She was probably in her late 60s, her face tight with a squint that made it hard to tell if she was watching us or something beyond. She studied Mara. "Girls dress like that in the city, I'm sure," she said, eyeing her up and down. "But the river isn't a place for soft hearts." She dropped a handful of apples into a paper bag and folded the top slowly. "Out here, some things take advantage when you offer parts of yourself without thinking." Mara smiled politely, jaw tightening slightly. She wasn't the kind to confront strangers, so she offered a brief, "of course," before turning to me. I caught the look in her eyes, the kind that said, "Get me out of here before I say something I shouldn't." "Let's go," I said, already moving. "We still need to hit the hardware store before it closes. Thanks for the warning." We stepped outside, into the sunlight, and Mara was silent for exactly 3 seconds. "Bloody hell," she muttered. "Cover up? Because my arms are showing? It's 21 degrees, and I'm wearing a nice sundress. Sorry for dressing for warm weather, not a funeral." She didn't wait for a reply, just kept walking. "I get it's a small town, but come on. Offering bits of yourself? Wear something that doesn't invite trouble?" She made air quotes while walking. It's just polite language for know your place, girl. Did you notice they didn't say a word to you? I did, I said. And yeah, it's ridiculous. I glanced back at the shop, then ahead at the worn cobbles with grass poking through and nettles crowding the roadside. These people have known each other forever. They've grown up together, shared weddings, funerals, and everything in between. They've probably been sitting in the same pub with the same complaints since the 70s. I kicked a loose stone. We're just strangers here. It doesn't matter how reasonable we sound, it's still us stepping into their town. That doesn't make what they said right, just shows it's not about us. I nudged her elbow gently. You know, you could bring some soaps to the store. Give them something nice. Maybe they'll be nicer in return. That made the corner of her mouth twitch. A small win. A few days in, I was still adjusting. But Mara had already settled into country life as if she'd belonged there forever. She was in boots, basket on her arm, gathering wild herbs from the hedgerows by name. She hung bundles of yarrow, mugwort, lavender, and horsetail on twine across the kitchen window. There was always something fragrant tucked behind her ear. She sang quietly while working, soft hums and wordless tunes that filled the house like incense and lifted my spirits while I worked remotely. Sometimes I'd find little love notes tucked under my coffee mug, sketches of flowers or hearts. It felt wonderful, until I remembered why we were really here. I began taking early morning runs, leaving before Mara was awake, lacing my shoes on the doorstep while the sky was still waking. It gave me space to think, but no matter how far I ran, I kept circling. Back to the same thought. I had to tell her. The longer I waited, the worse it would get. I hadn't just made a mistake. I had destroyed our old life. This cottage, this so-called fresh start, was damage control. And yet, she was happy here. Part of me wondered if I told her now, would she be angry enough to leave? Or would she stay because, despite everything, something good had come from the mess? I didn't know. I just knew I couldn't avoid it forever. One morning, I tried a new path, still figuring out which trails were worth the mud and which left you stuck far from where you wanted to be. This one dipped through a patch of larch and followed the river for a while. It was colder there. Damp hung heavy in the air, thickening in the morning fog near the riverbank. I noticed figures in the mist, women standing knee-deep in the river, backs turned, half hidden by trees and fog. They were barefoot, dresses soaked and clinging to their legs. Their headscarves were tied tight, hiding every strand of hair. They moved silently, slowly scrubbing stained fabric against old wooden washboards. One lifted a cloth strip, twisting it hard until red water dripped out. Then I slipped. My foot gave way, and I fell hard, landing on my knee. Sharp pain shot up my leg, forcing an expletive. My hands scraped the gravel, skin raw. I stayed down a moment, catching my breath. When I looked, blood was already soaking through my joggers. When I limped back inside, Mara was hanging herbs by the kitchen window while making breakfast. She looked at my leg, then at my stained top, frowning. What happened? River path, I said. Slipped. She examined the blood streaks down my pants, touching the fabric carefully, then looked at me for a long moment. Good thing, she said. I made a new soap yesterday. Good for blood. Might help pull that out. She moved to the shelf and peeled back linen from a stack of pale gray bars, more than usual. I frowned. Planning a bulk sale I don't know about? She didn't answer, focused on not burning breakfast. She handed me a bar. Use cold water first, she advised. Always cold. Heat sets the stain. Then scrub with this. Work it in and let it sit a bit. She didn't offer to help, which was unusual. Was it the bend by the river? She asked casually. Where the fog rolls in? I nodded. She didn't look up. That's where the best wild yarrow grows. Lots of it just before the river curves inland. Some's gone to seed, but I've still found good bunches. She stirred the pot slowly. It's quiet out there, she said. I know what you're going to say. Yes, I saw the river wives, as they call them. Don't worry, she scoffed. I didn't bother them. But it's mad a town like this lets its oldest women stand in the cold doing laundry like it's 1820. Bloody backward, if you ask me. There was a long pause as I thought back to my encounter earlier that morning. Yeah, you're right, I finally said. But this isn't really our place. Do you really need to go all the way out there for yarrow? I can pick some up on my runs if you want. She turned around slowly. I like it here, she said. I actually love it. But I'm not naive. You saw how they treated me. Like I was a child or a pet. She set the spoon down a little harder than intended. I'm not going to shrink just to make this place easier. I enjoy my walks and finding things myself. I don't need someone gathering yarrow for me like I'm some fragile little wife who should stay indoors. Okay, I said, gently. I understand. Sorry, she sighed, rubbing the bridge of her nose. That wasn't aimed at you. Just everything. This place is so beautiful until people start talking like that. I stepped closer and rested my hand lightly on her back. She didn't pull away. You're right, I said softly. You shouldn't have to make yourself smaller, not for anyone. She looked at me, something softening in her eyes. Her shoulders relaxed a little. We came here to grow, but instead I'm supposed to fold myself up. You won't, I assured her. Not with me. Not ever. She leaned into me with a small, tired sigh, and I wrapped my arms around her carefully, mindful of the herbs tied at her hip. I like that you worry, she murmured. Just don't treat me like I'm fragile. I'm not. I know, I replied. You're a force to be reckoned with. That made her laugh quietly. She rested her forehead on my shoulder for a moment longer, then pulled away and glanced at my leg. You better start scrubbing, by the way. If you let that stain set, I'm not making a second batch. Noted, I said. Cold water, firm scrubbing, let it sit. Got it. She gave me a mock-serious nod and returned to her pot. I waited a few days before running again. My knee still hurt when I bent it too far, but I told myself the ache was a sign of healing. It was early morning again, and the fog thickened as I neared the river like last time. But this time, I was determined to see what was beyond it. As I expected, they were there again. The same women, dresses soaked, dragging wet clothes against washboards. But this time, one turned slightly, as if hearing me approach. Her face was mostly hidden, the scarf covering everything except the curve of her jaw. Would you be kind, she said, and give this one a twist? These old hands aren't what they used to be. She held up a dripping sheet, dark and heavy with water sliding, off in thick strands. There was something about her request I couldn't place. So I stopped. The fog pressed against my back. The only sound was fabric rubbing and water slapping on stone. The birdsong had vanished. My fingers twitched, ready to move, and I shuffled, my feet. Then I noticed her arms, pale and swollen, much more than the usual prune from water exposure. The dress near her wrists was torn in places, like it had been picked at. The sheet wasn't clean. The water dripping off it was thick and red, too heavy to be just mud. Come on, love, she said again, softer this time. You've got young arms. My joints have been awful lately. Terrible rheumatism in the elbows. It just needs a twist. She gave the sheet a little hopeful shake, but still didn't look at me, which made me uneasy. I don't know why, but it made my skin crawl. There's something strange about someone asking for help without meeting your eyes. My wrists have been locking up something fierce, she added, as if it pained her to say. This damp air. It's worse than before. You'd be doing me a kindness. The other women kept working silently, ignoring me completely. The warnings from the general store crept back. Eyes down, don't greet them, don't offer anything. At first, I thought it was unnecessarily harsh, rude without reason. But at that moment, it seemed like advice given with care. Still, I hesitated. What if she really was just an old woman standing in cold water, soaked through, wrists failing from years of this work? What if I was the bad person watching her struggle and walking away? I started. Oh, sod it then, she snapped at my hesitation. Suit yourself. Her tone surprised me. It wasn't the hurt of being rejected, but sharp and impatient, like she'd dropped something and blamed me. Not even a moment for an old woman with bad arms, she hissed, more to the river than me. What a thing, watching someone struggle and turning your back. Must be nice being young and quick. Men are so selfish. I clenched my jaw, feeling my face flush with embarrassment. A few days ago, Mara had nearly scolded me for offering help. Now, an old woman in a river made me feel like the villain for not pitching in. I didn't know what women wanted anymore. I chose silence and let the fog take over. I turned back, letting my feet do what they came to do. Move. The trail cut through. Thickets and pine. The cold stuck to my skin. The river's sound faded behind me. I let it go. By the time I got home, the sun had fully risen. The mist was already pulling away like it had never been. But something had changed. I felt off. The run drained me. My legs ached, my fingers stiffened, and a dull ache pulsed in the back of my head that hadn't been there before. I skipped breakfast, took a hot shower that barely helped, and by late afternoon, I was curled on the sofa, useless. Mara came in from the garden, dirt on her knees and a fresh bunch of herbs in hand. She was slightly damp from a sudden rain shower. She looked at me, then toward the kettle near the fire. You're not running tomorrow. I wasn't planning to, I said, my voice hoarse, sounding rougher than I expected. You look like a washed-out sock, she said, crouching to stir the fire. Bit of man flu? Something like that. She didn't press further and set the kettle carefully above the fire before sitting beside me, still smelling like rosemary and wet grass. Maybe your body's trying to tell you something, she said softly. That you keep pushing into places that don't want you. I said nothing. Didn't know how. She was right, though. She handed me a cup of tea without asking. Strong, a little. Bitter? The kind she made when I was sick? You resting tomorrow? She asked gently again. Yeah, I said. I'm staying in. We can have a lie-in together. She smiled but stayed distant. Absolutely not, she said. I make soaps, not cures. The last thing I need is catching whatever this is and sneezing on my stock. I gave a weak laugh, nearly choking on the tea. Wow, no bedside manner. She grinned. Not in the job description. If you want sympathy, you'll have to bribe me with biscuits. Then maybe you'll get tea and toast in bed. The next morning, the sun woke me before I was ready. It streamed through, thin curtains and warm bands across my face. Nice, actually. One of those rare mornings when the light feels soft rather than harsh. I still felt awful, and I realized I'd sweated through the night, despite the sun's warmth and calm making me want to stay in that state longer. I reached over, expecting the softness of Mara's skin, but the bed was empty. Her side was flat and cold. I blinked at the ceiling, confused. I'd been looking forward to tea and toast in bed like she usually did when I was sick. I listened. The house had thin walls. You could hear everything. But there was nothing. Just silence. I sat up slowly, my head swimming with that cotton wool in your skull dizziness. Everything seemed too bright and sharp. My legs were heavy with exhaustion, but I swung them over the side of the bed and stood on the cold tile floor. I moved around the house, noticing nothing unusual until I saw her boots were gone. She wouldn't have gone far. Or at least, that's what I told myself. But something felt wrong. Mara had gathered all her herbs already. She said so. The herbs were drying on the twine above the sink, and her supplies were in their usual places. I looked up at the shelf where she kept her finished soaps. The top row held the usual: lavender, oat, rosemary. But the pale gray bars she had me use the other day were missing. I stepped closer, squinting. Maybe they'd been moved to the market box? My mind felt foggy, as if thinking through a screen. I steadied myself against the shelf. Nothing, not a single bar left. I opened the bin on impulse. Half buried under yesterday's peelings was the linen wrap she used for packaging. The same dotted cloth she had shown me with the batch, folded once and then crumpled, like someone had changed their mind at the last second. I knew where she had gone. Even before I allowed myself to admit it, I knew. I turned quickly and grabbed the nearest shoes. My head spun as I bent down, but I shoved them on anyway. The air outside was crisp, but warmed by the rising sun. The familiar low mist returned, thicker near the fields, clinging to my throat with each breath. My legs resisted. As soon as I started running, cold muscles, lingering fever, I felt off. Still, I pushed forward. The trail was soft from last night's rain. I slipped repeatedly, barely catching myself before falling. My breathing became rapid and uneven far too quickly. I followed the path's curve, past the hedgerow, past the place I had fallen before. Then, I spotted her boot prints in the mud, leading toward the water's edge. I quickened my pace. There she was. Mara stood at the riverbank, boots muddy, sleeves rolled up. Her hands extended forward, offering soap to the river wives. The closest woman raised her head, and I saw her clearly. Her face was swollen in some areas, sunken in others, as if soaked too long in the wrong water. She reminded me of a bloated corpse. Her skin had a gray, puffy appearance, like images you regret having seen. Her lips were thin, but swollen at the edges, losing their shape. I opened my mouth to call out, but my stomach twisted. The run, the fever, and the sight of the woman hit me all at once. The taste of last night's food rose up my throat. I barely managed to lurch aside before vomiting. I doubled over, retching hard, hands braced on my knees. Bitter, half-digested vomit splattered on the mud. My eyes watered. The sound, the smell, and the sting in my nose only made it worse. I wiped my mouth on the back of my robe sleeve, heart pounding, chest heaving. Mara turned toward me, concern clear on her face. She didn't have time to speak. The river wives moved with alarming speed. One surged from the water with a wet heave, fabric slapping stone. Mara turned back too late. Her hands fumbled, the soap slipping from her grip and falling to the rocks. More rose beside her, another, then another. They surrounded her, waterlogged limbs winding around her legs, waist, and arms. One pressed a palm against her chest. Her boots lost traction, and she collapsed to her knees. They dragged their washboards over her back, arms, and scalp, as if trying to scrub her clean. They worked quickly. Her clothes tore at the seams. Threads pulled loose, like worms from stitching. Her skin followed, peeled back in patches, redness blooming, then fading beneath the froth. One twisted her wrist until it popped. Another bit down on Mara's shoulder like it was bread. Flesh gave way. Mara's mouth opened, but no sound came. I forced myself upright, stumbling forward as my legs betrayed me. Mara reached out weakly, trying to push away, to reach me. Then her head slipped under the water. Her hair was the last thing I saw, spreading like ink in water. I stepped forward, one foot sinking into the bank, but I couldn't move further. I was outnumbered. Too many of them. And whatever they weren't just old women with stiff joints. I vomited again, barely able to stand, trembling. The taste lingered in my mouth, and sweat clung to my neck. One turned slightly toward me, enough to show she noticed me. I stumbled back, shoes slipping in the mud. My heel caught a root, and I fell hard, hands scraping cold, muddy stone. I scrambled back to my feet, losing a shoe to the river, then ran faster than I ever had. I didn't stop until I reached the village edge. My lungs burned. My chest felt tight. One foot was raw, sock soaked through. Mud stuck to my calves like tar. I collapsed into the village center, gasping, hunched, scanning for anyone. The first person I saw was the woman from the shop. She didn't flinch. "You're a mess," she said, eyes flicking to my missing shoe, then the blood and dirt on my arm. "You went down there, didn't you?" I opened my mouth, but the words wouldn't come. My throat tightened. Behind her, a man leaned out from the post office steps. He looked at me and shook his head as if he'd already seen enough. "You were warned, son. Don't bring that trouble here. Leave or go back and finish what you started." I shook my head, breathless, voice barely audible. "I need the police. Someone," the woman scoffed. "No one's calling anyone. What would they even do? Fill out paperwork and lose it?" I looked at her. Mud stained my legs, acid burned my throat, one shoe gone to the river. I must have looked half crazed. "She's gone," I said dryly. "They took her." The shopwoman just shook her head. "Then it's done." She studied me again, no pity in her eyes. "They're not coming for you. Whatever happened, it was between her and them. They don't pay much attention to men." She nodded toward my state, as if that explained everything. "You're not theirs to bother, not unless you give them a reason." She hesitated, then nodded toward the village green. "You can waste your morning reporting it. The police will poke around, but by the time they get there, nothing will be left. They never find anything." She tucked her hands into her cardigan sleeves. "Or, you can come inside, sit down, have a cup of tea, let it settle, decide what you want to do next, if anything." I couldn't respond. The clouds had thickened, and a fine rain began again. She gave me a look. Less sympathy, more a quiet, "Well, your choice." The weeks that followed were slow and quietly unbearable. The shopwoman was right. The police found nothing. They looked at me like they knew the truth, like an adult checking under a child's bed for monsters. They had me recount everything. It sounded like a story. One officer nodded as if listening, but I could tell he was just filling in forms. Eventually, they came down to the river, boots hesitant at the edge, as if afraid to get dirty. One crouched, staring into the water as if it might reveal something, if he looked long enough. The other paced, poking reeds with a stick as if searching for a neatly folded body. They found nothing and seemed resigned to it. Their movements were slow and half-hearted. In the end, they gave me a number and said someone might contact me if anything came up, though probably not. I didn't leave town. I couldn't. Every room held her presence despite the short time we shared. Her handwriting on labels, her coat, hanging behind the door, that chipped mug she claimed had character. Some mornings I woke up forgetting, turning to her side of the bed, expecting warmth and weight, only to find a cold sheet and silence. That silence dragged me back to that day, straight to the mud and her last moments reaching out. My chest would tighten like someone squeezed it, hands shaking. Breathing came sharp and fast, like choking. Sometimes I curled up and waited it out. Other times I sat up, palms pressed to my knees to hold myself still until the wave passed. It always passed, but slowly. Some days I thought about burning the whole house down with me inside. But I didn't. The townspeople began treating me differently. With nods and cups of tea, they asked how I was managing. They didn't say sorry outright, but it was there in their care. Hilda, the shopwoman, started saving me the good milk without asking. An older man gave me his spare radio, in case the silence ever gets too loud. "You're one of us now," Hilda said, handing me a bag of apples free of charge. "Everyone loses someone, sooner or later." So I stayed, partly because I had nowhere else to go, partly because of my debt. Even if I could leave, the thought of moving on without her sickened me. I kept Mara's shop running under her name, relabeling her soaps as Mara's Blend and selling them at the market. They sold well. I made mistakes at first, but before long, the scents began to smell like her. About a month later, I realized I was out of yarrow. The last bit had gone into the newest batch. It didn't feel right to stop making one of our best sellers. I thought about asking someone to get more, but that felt like giving up. So I waited. Days became a week. I avoided getting more, even searched in different places. I told myself the blend didn't need yarrow, but I knew better every time I touched the label. Mara would have been furious if she saw me half finish something under her name. The thought stayed with me, growing sharp. I saw her hands, the way she held the bars while curing, thumb tracing the edges. She never left things unfinished. Not even breakfast. Yet, I was letting fear decide what got made, letting it whisper that maybe it wasn't worth finishing, that maybe it was safer to quit. Mara would have seen through that immediately. She'd probably have thrown a damp tea towel at me, followed by that sharp look that said, "Pull yourself together." And she'd have been right. The anger grew, starting low in my chest, curling into every corner of the cottage and onto her side of the bed. Eventually, it boiled over into an idea I couldn't shake. That evening, the local pub was lively but dimly lit. A few regulars sat scattered across tables shouting jokes. The fire was more glow than flame, embers flickering to keep the cold off the walls. George, the man who gave me the radio, sat near the back, half watching darts on TV. I took the stool beside him quietly, skipping a drink. "You still got that shotgun?" I asked. "Bloody hell," he said after a pause. "No hello anymore?" "Not in the mood, clearly." He looked at me like he already knew why I was here. "What for?" "Foxes," I said. "They've been digging up the garden, ruining Mara's corner, chewing through her plants." That made him pause and set down his pint with a low mutter. "Bloody hell," he said. "That patch always looked proper. Didn't think foxes'd bother with herbs." He fell quiet, brows knitting as if debating the truth of that. Heard others say the same. Not just foxes. Badgers, rabbits, too. All bold now, not scared. They just watch you, like they're daring you. I nodded. "That's what I've seen." He studied me. "Planning to shoot?" "Only if I have to." He let it hang for a moment, then nodded. "I'll get it to you in the morning. One day only. Barrel pulls left if you're not careful. It kicks hard. Don't try to be clever." "I won't." Early the next day, I set out. The sky was gray, the path soft from rain. The shotgun, wrapped in oilcloth, was strapped across my back. I felt its weight with every step. "Foxes," I'd said. "Pests." George must have understood, handing me the gun with a knowing nod. "Do what you must, but don't come crying after." The fog was thicker now, clinging to hedges, swirling low across the path. Visibility was poor. I couldn't see the river yet, but I could sense it nearby. Cold, damp, inevitable. I stopped, unstrapped the gun, oilcloth damp from the mist. I unwrapped it slowly, feeling its weight. It felt wrong, like it knew I didn't belong holding it. My hands weren't steady. Never handled one like this before. Yet here I was, alone in the mud, fog curling around my ankles, gripping a loaded shotgun as if I knew what to do. I opened the barrel to check the 2 shells, both in place. Clicking it shut made a clear, final sound. I moved on slowly, boots sinking with each step. My heartbeat thudded in my jaw and fingertips. Then I saw her. A woman stood in the water with her back turned, her dress soaked, clinging to her legs, her head wrapped tightly in a scarf. Every muscle tensed. I raised the gun and flicked off the safety with my thumb, clumsy and stiff. The click was loud, raising the hairs on my neck. The figure reacted, one foot dragging through the water like she was remembering how to stand. Her body swayed slightly. I braced the stock against my shoulder, lifted the barrel, and lined up through the gray mist. The fog swirled thickly around her, showing only a blurry shape. I couldn't see her face, but I knew what this was. One of them. I had seen this before, the shape, the silence, the soaked dress, heavy sleeves, hidden hair. Nothing left to recognize. Just another of them, waiting for her next victim. I aimed. Then, just as I had her in my sights, she spoke. "Did you finally bring those biscuits you promised me?" The words knocked the ground from beneath me. My arms dropped slightly and shook. The gun felt heavier, because it was her, Mara.